Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. The death of Queen Elizabeth and the accession of King Charles has meant that the attention of much of the world has been riveted on Great Britain. And once again, this is a reminder of the fact that a small island off the coast of Europe, a diminishing economy and a declining political power, still has the capacity to fascinate the imagination of the world. So today we ask, is this a paradox, or is this in fact Britain's real influence? Joining me to discuss this subject is India's former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, an author of beguiling biographies and historical fiction, Navtej Sarna. His latest book, Crimson Spring, was published just a few weeks ago. Navtej Sarna, let's start with that critical question. A small island off the coast of Europe, a diminishing economy, a declining political power, but it has the capacity to captivate and fascinate the imagination of the world. Would you agree this is both a paradox, but also a sign of Britain's continuing soft power influence?
Well, thank you, Karan. Thank you for having me here. And actually, your words remind me of what the Manchu emperor in 1793 told the British ambassador who had gone there to open a trade mission. And he rejected the British gifts and then said, go back to your small island. In the remote corner, far away, in a remote corner of the earth. So that was the perception from the Middle Kingdom and may as well be today in many parts of the world. I think what you say is correct. It's both a paradox at one level, because if you see the objective parameters of power, yes, there has been an objective decline. And at the same time, I think it is a unique combination of soft power and considerable hard power. Let's not say that there isn't hard power. The United Kingdom is still a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's a nuclear weapons state. It has one of the stronger defense budgets in the world, fifth or sixth in the world.
And it's a G7 member.
It's a G7 member. It's a prominent member of NATO. But so, in its soft power begins to exceed the projection of its hard power. But the fact is that it still has a blue water navy. It has outreach in the seas. So it's a unique combination of all these factors. But we do see in the present situation a lot of display of soft power.
Let's talk about some of the qualities and attributes of Great Britain that enthrall the world. And those are really to do with what you call its soft power. And I imagine the first of those qualities is the British monarchy. There's an apocryphal story about King Farouk of Egypt, who, when he was deposed in the 1950s, said that one day there will be only 5 kings left in the world. The King of Hearts, the King of Spades, the King of Clubs, the King of Diamonds, and the King of England. And he was really referring to the fact that the world considers the British monarchy unique. In your eyes, because you've lived there, you met the Queen, you presented your credentials to her. What is it about the British monarchy that is so special?
Well, I think King Farouk, who was deposed in 1952, may have had a sense of pique. because the British High Commissioner was reported to have described him as completely dissolute, uneducated, lazy, inconsiderate, and all sorts of other nice things. And but in 1952 was a long time back. And in 1952, the empire was still holding. I mean, India was independent, but there were large swathes of the world which were still under the so-called British Empire, under the British Empire. And I think what he probably meant is that there is the predominance of the British monarchy was right up there and looked very permanent. A lot has happened since. And the empire has actually dissolved. I mean, it has been replaced in a very modified way by, say, the Commonwealth, which
but
of
the
course,
monarchy continues to captivate us.
Well, the monarchy does captivate the world because I think it's been a unique sort of institution full of glamour, and I think a lot of that credit probably goes to the late Queen Elizabeth. Because the way she ascended to the throne, the way she maintained her dignity through a lot of troubles, I think it's a kind of, as the world has changed, there are some things which have remained constant, that yes, this was the empire, this was the emperor, this was the queen. But I must add that it's not an unalloyed memory, because as we have seen today, there's a lot of stuff that's coming out which is saying that behind this glamour, behind this rather odd institution of the monarchy, which fascinated thousands of people every day outside Buckingham Palace, there are thousands watching the change of guards, there has been a masking of a lot of colonial repression, a lot of colonial excess.
Without doubt. But you're attributing a lot of the glamour, the glory, the mystique of the monarchy to Queen Elizabeth, but it's true also that Queen Victoria had it. Most of the royal families of Europe were in fact related to Victoria, her sons, her daughters, her grandchildren. I mean, one of her daughters was Empress of Germany, one of her granddaughters was Empress of Russia. I mean, the mystique and the hold of the British monarchy goes all the way back to Victoria.
Or even more so then, because then there was actually an empire which covered 1/5 of the world's surface.
And the sun never set on it.
And the sun never set on it. And I think a lot of credit that accrues to Victoria was because of India. Because, India was really the jewel in the crown, and all the riches, all the great palaces, all the museums, etc., 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 were built at the cost of India.
So, underpinning the glamour, the glory, the mystique of the British monarchy from Queen Victoria onwards, and maybe even earlier, is actually the fact that they possessed India.
Of course, I think without India, the British Empire would not have had this tremendous sway that it had, and the tremendous impress, right or wrong, that it has left upon the world. Because if it just had the Caribbean and the certain African nations and not the riches of India, I don't think they would have been able to hold on to it.
So the kings and queens of England really became important and fascinating and mystifying because they were also emperors and empresses of India.
Absolutely. I mean, Victoria became Empress of India in the 1870s, and then sort of, really became this larger than life figure.
So when the world glorifies in the monarchy of Britain, actually the truth is we in India had a lot to do with the image they built up for themselves.
Well, we did, and at a great cost to India. At a great cost to India, because our economy, I mean, this has been written about by people who know more about this, how the economy, went from a high to a completely colonized and deprived economy by 1947.
Now, you mentioned Queen Elizabeth, and there's no doubt that Queen Elizabeth, in the 70 years that she's reigned, has also captivated the world as a person. So it's not just the institution of the monarchy, it's the person of the last sovereign. In fact, at her death, President Macron addressed the British people, and this is what he said: "For you, she was your queen. For us, she was the queen."
Yes.
That's an incredible tribute from the President of France to a British sovereign.
I think this is a very important distinction that you draw between the person and the institution. And all the criticism that you're reading out today, in particularly from the erstwhile colonies, about slavery, about reparations, about all those, those are attacking the institution. And the Queen managed to sort of paper over a lot of this, as she managed to mask a lot of the peccadillos of the rest of the royal family that happened from time to time. And I think she managed to project this picture of quiet dignity, this sincere commitment, a very human kind of person with a touch of humor. Every meeting that people had with her, they came away feeling that, oh, she is an ordinary person who likes sandwiches and likes to joke about
Is that how she came across when you met her?
Well, I think she was utterly charming in that meeting that we had with her at Buckingham Palace. She had read up everything on me. She had read up on my wife and my wife's work, and she engaged us in a great conversation. It was all about 10 to 12 minutes. But, after the presentation of the credentials, we talked about cricket, we talked about Indian soldiers in World War I. And she said, there is some cricket going on in South Asia. I said, Your Majesty, there's always cricket going on in South Asia. She says, do you watch cricket? I said, not so much. I used to watch it when they used to play in whites. And she said, yes, nowadays they play in sort of pajamas, don't they? so that was the kind of
I take it
easy charm that she had.
But she meant that as a joke.
Of course. She had that impish sort of humor about her.
And this is something the world admired, the world loved. And this is why there's such an outpouring of interest in her funeral obsequies as they take place every single day.
That's right. But again, I must say that as many sort of eulogies are coming out, as much as the criticism of the empire is coming out. So today it is very difficult to judge where this debate is going to rest.
But you mentioned a moment ago the peccadillos of the royal family, and the truth is, it's not just the glory and the glamour of the Mountbatten Windsors that we've all reveled in. We've been equally interested and fascinated by their infidelities, by their peccadillos, by their romances and their affairs, and occasionally even by allegations of corruption that have been raised against them. And think about it historically. There was Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend and Roddy Llewellyn. Then there was Princess Diana, Prince Charles, Camilla, and the tampon story. And then most recently, there's Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre. The world simply can't have enough of finding out about them.
Well, that's a kind of lascivious streak in everybody, and particularly when it comes from the rich and famous and applies to them, I think it gets an extra twist because it makes them look ordinary. It makes them look people who make mistakes. They are like you and me, and they are people who are given to infirmities. So it takes them off the pedestal a bit, and I think then the media takes over, and the tabloid industry, which you know very well, sort of then projects it, and it's a huge industry, and particularly when there's
But there's something more, surely. When Charles, or before him Princess Margaret, or now Prince Andrew, have affairs, it's more than just a love affair. It becomes a matter of international interest. Everyone wants to know the details. Everyone remembers the story, and probably far more than the stories about Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe.
Of course, because then, this comes from this fairy tale family, and the fairy tale family is suddenly, putting its foot wrong. And then if it's fairy tale sex, it sells even more than normal sex.
And I suppose the truth is, The Crown on Netflix made a cool fortune telling the world the story of the British royal family. But if it had been the story of the Japanese or any of the Scandinavian royal families or the Dutch, the interest would have been a lot less.
Of course, because that's again because of history. It's because the reach of the empire, the familiarity that the markets of Netflix have with this monarchy, which they don't have with the Japanese. I mean, Netflix, you got the huge viewership in India, all over Asia, And we are all familiar with all this family. We are not familiar with the Scandinavian
That's
royal
the point
family.
I'm making.
So
The
it's
familiarity-
again a takeoff from the empire.
But isn't that the point? The familiarity, not just India, but the world has
The world.
with the British royal family.
Yeah.
And going back way beyond the Queen to Victoria and Edward, George V, and perhaps even earlier, all the way to Charles I, if you want to talk about it, that familiarity with royal families elsewhere, doesn't it?
I think it's a unique combination of history, empire, tradition, pageantry, the English language, the reach of the English language, which has been far more, I won't say universal, but far more widespread than the
You
others.
mentioned pageantry, and there's a thought occurred to me. How much of Britain's flair for pageantry, how much of the fact that Britain has retained, loved, cultivated its archaic and quaint customs and traditions is an explanation for our fascination with their monarchy? For us, it represents a world that's lost and long forgotten, and yet you switch on TV, and there it is alive and kicking in Britain at the moment.
Yes, but I think a lot of people are fascinated. A lot of people ridicule it. Let's again, face the facts. A lot of people say, what is this drama going on when the real world has moved on centuries? A lot of people admire the fact that there is this tradition, this pageantry, and particularly the all that related.
So the world has two opinions.
The world has two opinions on the monarchy, on the empire, and on pageantry today. Because you go, as I said, if you just see the changing of the guards, you see the thousands of people who are there to see that bit of a drama that goes on outside Buckingham Palace every day. But there are lots of people who say that, this is it's a little play act going on there.
Let's come to a second source of Britain's influence on the world. And this time it arises out of its language, English. Not only has English over the generations become an aspirational language for people, but it's probably today most people's preferred second language. Is that to do with empire? Is it to do with the fact that English is also the American language, even if they can't pronounce it properly? Or is there something about the quality of the English language that gives it a feel and touch and a romantic assessment that other languages don't have?
Again, a very complicated question, but I think if I was to take it as at first step, it was the empire, it was the outreach, that the colonies were taught English. I mean, the part of the populace of the colonies learnt English, and that was the road to success, that was the road to education, that was the road to jobs. And I think that sort of has carried on.
And let me just point out,
yeah.
that affects half the world. America, Canada in America,
Yeah.
India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the whole of Africa.
Yeah.
And parts of the Caribbean after that.
And I think at a second level, I think a language becomes powerful if the people who speak it are powerful.
That's the Americans.
And that's the Americans. I mean, although you may well argue that American is a different language, but not quite. So, today the Americans speak English with an accent. And the American media is in English, the American entertainment industry and all of Hollywood is in English. So I think the influence has gone just not from that small island, but gone to America and projected itself all over the world.
But does English as a language have qualities that perhaps other languages don't, which also explains its dominance?
Well, it would, you probably, since you and I know English better than at least I know Japanese or French, I would probably like to believe that English has a certain, spread because of its inherent qualities. But again, then, people who know the other languages better could well argue against that. So I'm not very sure if that will hold.
Clearly, English and the power of English is responsible for the fact that William Shakespeare is perhaps the world's best known author. There are others who are equally great. Pushkin, Homer, Dante, Kalidas. But in comparison to the man the whole world calls the bard, they just literally pale in comparison.
Absolutely. I think William Shakespeare is by far and above the most popular and the most widespread author and his plays. And there's several reasons for that. I think one of the things is that Shakespeare didn't write about a time and a place or about, or as a playwright of England or Stratford on Avon. He wrote on human qualities. He wrote on every known human quality which is universal. He wrote the most perceptive things about love, jealousy, hate, racism, every possible thing. And he also wrote at a time, because you must remember that the London theatre scene was alive when Shakespeare was writing, and he became famous in his own lifetime. And then he's been translated all over the world. Did you know that we had about, at last count, and the last count was about 50 years ago, there are about 670 translations and adaptations of Shakespeare in India.
But if Shakespeare had written in either Russian or Swahili, or even German, would he have been as famous? It's English that's made him accessible and given him that pedestal from where he looks down on everyone.
Well, and not only that, he created English words. He created a lot of English.
Most of the phrases we use today,
most of the phrases
are from
Shakespeare's plays.
Yep.
So he took the English language and he made it jump around. And a lot of it, of the language you owe to Shakespeare himself.
And today, Britain gets the credit to Shakespeare.
And to finish the response to your question, Shakespeare traveled with the empire, and then he stayed on. Shakespeare's plays went to India, they went to America, they went to other places in the world, and they stayed on. And one of the most popular places, ironically, in which for Shakespeare is Germany.
And Shakespeare gives Britain a lot of the soft power influence it has today.
It does. And I think the British Council did a huge project on the 400th death anniversary of Shakespeare, and it was called Shakespeare Lives, and they've checked out his popularity in several countries, including China.
And it's huge.
And it's huge.
Now, a third reason why Britain has enormous soft power influence, I would say, is the BBC. And the paradox here is that the BBC is nowhere near as well resourced as CNN, and several British governments commit themselves to actually emasculating the institution. And yet, internationally, and probably far more so outside Britain than in Britain, it has a unique reputation for authority, for accuracy, for integrity. I recall that in 1984, when his mother was assassinated, and despite the fact the entire Indian state was there to inform him, Rajiv only fully believed the news when he tuned in his transistor to the BBC and Market Ali confirmed it.
Well, you'd have a better inside knowledge of that moment, because I'm sure there were other sources around his mother who should have told him. But the fact is that the entire country heard Market Ali at about noon, and knew that Mrs. Gandhi had died, although All India Radio didn't announce it till the evening.
In fact, Pranab Mukherjee, in the second volume of his 3-part autobiography, I suppose you can call it, actually recounts how in the car and later in the plane, Rajiv kept fiddling with his transistor to tune into the BBC. And he kept listening to the BBC. And that is, in a sense, an example and illustration of the power and influence of that one channel.
Well, those right during those days when there was so much happening in Punjab, there was another story that used to be told of people in Punjab cycling around with the transistor radio in the cycle basket, and then coming up with telling the news and saying in Punjabi ki Bibi ne kya hai. So it used to come from that. But to give a serious response to your question, I think the BBC has developed, despite a lot of problems they've had, they've been accused of all sorts of bias, and it's well true. So I wouldn't agree that the BBC has a high reputation for impartiality. Even by the off-cam reports in England, in the UK, the Channel 4 has a higher standing in terms of impartiality. But they have a good reputation for accuracy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Accuracy, and people believe that the BBC, when they report something, is correct.
Well, that is again a brand that the BBC has built up.
And that brand works to Britain's favour again.
And that brand works to Britain's favour because the BBC is heavily financed by the FCO. And although they have kept themselves away to maintain that credibility that we are not a government's soundbox.
And yet the paradox is that the BBC's brand value is not appreciated as much in Britain as it is outside. I mean, successive British governments, including the present one, have often committed themselves to emasculating the BBC, of denying it its charter, of denying it several of the rights and prerogatives it has. Outside, the BBC is a brand for Britain.
It's a brand, and we don't worry about who's financing it and all that. But again, depending on the listeners, I mean, it's accused of anti-American bias. It's accused of anti-India bias. It's accused of anti-Israeli and anti-Palestinian bias. So there are all sorts of things, and there are reports, official reports, going deep into all these issues.
Mr. Sarna, if you're accused of every single
then you're right.
possible, that's actually proof that you're probably equally treating everyone.
I think that's what journalists like to believe.
And I suppose the fourth quality that gives Britain its incredible influence is what I call Britain's incredible sense of humor. British humor is not just understated and subtle, but the quality that it has, which so many other countries don't, is that they actually laugh at themselves. Would you agree that it's a much admired form of humor, but pretty difficult to imitate?
Yes, I think it's difficult to imitate because, again, it's very heavily dependent on the use of language,
which they use brilliantly.
Yes, and it has all sorts. The British humor has innuendo, it has wit, it has banter, it has sarcasm. So I think it's a developed art form, which very often falls flat, for instance, in the US. And they have to tailor their comedies to the American household, to the American idiom, to make it work. It probably succeeds more in India, because again you're familiar with having grown up with those books and those films, etc. Whether you go back to Laurel and Hardy or you go back to Carry On series and the Ronnies and all sorts of things.
But you're absolutely right when you point out that British humor is hugely dependent on how the British people use their own language.
Yeah.
The way they speak English, their understatement, their choice of words is unique. The rest of us, we may know English as well, but we don't speak it the way the British do, and that's an attribute of their humor.
Yes, you mentioned the understatement. There's also the self-deprecation, which forms a very important part of that humor. So I think it's again, probably every developed language has certain things about it which only happen in that language. For instance, our own Indian languages each have their own idiom. The fact is that the world doesn't know about that. And we know about the English humor.
But there's another quality to British humor which people don't often realize. They don't spare anyone. The royal family is often the butt of British jokes. Vaudeville humor in the turn of the century often picked on the British royal family. Charles, as Prince of Wales, was frequently being joked about. In India, if you were to parody the Prime Minister or the President, chances are you'll end up with a sedition case against you and you'll be slung in jail. Nothing of the sort happens in Britain.
Well, that's the culture they have developed, and you mentioned Charles. I think he's adding to that bag of humor every day. If you see Twitter yesterday and today, you find more stuff happening. So again, I think that is they have internalized that system of being able to criticize everybody.
But that's the remarkable thing. They don't put people above jokes. The higher you are, the more they joke about you, because what the Brits realize, and we don't in India, is that in humor, one actually is expressing someone's popularity and also a level of affection for them.
Yes, and again, added to that, the fact that, beating up the upper classes is a very important part of the humor. I mean, the only, all of Woodhouse is showing the upper classes in, this fuddy-duddy light and how they go. So that is a very important part. The second very important part of British humor, which we haven't mentioned, is sheer smut. There's a lot of smut in that humor, which you don't find in other places. And at one level, that works.
And in fact, if you think about the comedy shows that we grew up laughing with, Yes, Prime Minister, The Two Ronnies, Mr. Bean, and I dare say you could go all the way back to Laurel and Hardy. The amazing thought is that British humour has kept the world laughing for generations.
Yes.
You really couldn't say that of the Germans, the Americans, the Australians, or the French.
No, certainly not. I think the British comedy has carved out a niche for itself all over the world. And people tune on it for obvious reasons, because they know it works.
And that is another source of influence for Britain.
It is. It is. It is. As other universities, as other stuff in Britain.
So to go back to the point you made, there's no doubt that Britain has a lot of hard power. It is, as you pointed out, a member of the P5 and the G7. It has a blue water navy. It has a huge military budget. It also has probably the world's second or first credible financial centre. The City of London is very important. But at the level of ordinary people who look and see on television, it has the captivating royal family with its pageantry and its archaic but quaint customs. It has an English language that one associates with England because of the similarity. It has the BBC, and then it has the comedy shows and the humour. This soft power is a very important way of shoring up a country that is otherwise small, declining as an economy, and losing importance as a polity.
Absolutely right, except I would say that the monarchy part of it is at a very critical moment. It will depend on how they change themselves and adopt, because I think the woke culture is really becoming very strong.
Can I interrupt and say this? The monarchy part of it was at a critical juncture in 1997 when Diana died, and there were questions being asked in England itself whether the monarchy would survive. There was anger against the Queen for not coming down from Balmoral, where she happened to be, for not grieving. And in the last 25 years, they turned it around.
Well, let's wait and watch.
I mean, one of the things about the British monarchy is that they've had a king decapitated in 1649 and his son was brought back 11 years later. The monarchy has been through its tribulations, but it manages to survive and succeed.
Well, I think they will survive if they succeed, if they adapt to the new realities quickly enough.
But that's something the monarchy has been doing. It's
Yes.
a very different monarchy compared to the one in Queen Victoria's days.
Absolutely.
And Charles himself, in the first 2 days or 3 days of his kingship, is behaving differently to his mother.
That's right. I think because he's more alive to what's happening around the world, what happened on the Kate and William visit to the Caribbean, what's happening with the realms, and how one by one they are leaving the Commonwealth.
Then the other secret of the British monarchy is that it senses itself the need to change
A strong sense of survival.
and begins that. I mean, one of the things that Charles has done is to ensure that Prince Andrew, even though he's processing with his brothers and sisters, is not allowed to wear military uniform.
Yes.
He's been kept in suits because it's been said he's no longer a working member of the royal family. He is the Queen's son.
Yes.
He's not a working member, and Charles is keeping him out. That's another change that's happening.
That's right. And they'll have to do something similar. They've done something similar with Prince Harry.
So whilst question marks about the future of the monarchy legitimately exist and will be asked, there are clear signs that they have internally the capacity to change and adapt and survive.
That's true. That's true, but I think the world is changing very fast. So maybe this becomes a smaller and smaller island within the small island.
That is always inherent in the very geographical location of Britain and the fact that it is a diminishing economy and a shrinking political power.
Thank
I
you.
thank you for this interview, Navtej Sarna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? all you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.